Welcome to Resume 101. I'm Mary Isla Ward with Horizon Point Consulting. We are a firm that specializes in helping bring passion and productivity to the workplace, and it's exciting to spend some time with you to help you as you work to get your resume in a fashion that is going to be noticed by employers so that you can exhibit your talent, your passion, and your productivity in the workplace. To get started, we always like to create a roadmap for where we're going with any seminar. Today, we'll discuss the purpose of a resume. Before we do anything, it's always important to know why we're doing it by outlining the purpose. Secondly, we'll talk about how to format a resume, whether that be chronological or functional, in a way that's going to speak to the jobs that you're applying for and your skills. Next, we'll talk about what your resume needs to include. It's important to realize that based on the job opening, there are different things that will need to be included, but they're standard things like your contact information and your work history and your education that we'll discuss in terms of how you need to format that on the resume, where you need to put that on your resume, and how to make it stand out to employers. Next, we'll talk about what not to include on a resume. Oftentimes, the things that prohibit us from getting the interview that we want are things that we've included on their resume that should not be there, that do not put us in the most favorable light to employers. So, we'll discuss what does not need to be included on a resume. Most importantly, we'll talk about the best practices that are out there in the industry today to get your resume noticed by employers. Most employers spend 6 seconds if you're submitting your resume to a recruiter or a hiring manager, they will spend about 6 seconds looking at your resume. So if you count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it's important to know what you need to convey most in those 6 seconds by where you put things on the resume and also how you can cater the resume to the job posting for which you're applying. And we include a bonus here in our Resume 101 on cover letters. Oftentimes, a cover letter is also asked to be included when we apply for job openings, and the purpose of a cover letter is different than the purpose of a resume. So, we'll talk about what to include in a cover letter and provide you with a template for framing your thinking on how to draft cover letters based on the job opening. Okay, to get us started, we'll talk first about the purpose. And it's important to realize that the resume is a marketing tool. It's a tool for you to be able to get your foot in the door for an interview. I would doubt that any of you who are participating have been able to get a job solely through your resume. It's not the only thing that's going to get you a job. It's your foot in the door for that next step so you can convey why you're the best person for the job in an in-person or over the phone or virtual interview. The tool is a marketing tool, and oftentimes we neglect to be our own biggest cheerleader. We need to be able to market ourselves through the resume and highlight things that we've accomplished. With that being said, it's also important to realize that while we do need to take the opportunity to brag and market ourselves, there's never an occasion to fabricate or stretch the truth about our experience or education. I know that at some point all of you have seen someone in the news that has lost a job or has been declined a job because as someone did a background check on them, they realized that what was on their resume was not true. We've seen it with college coaches where they have said that they have a certain degree and they do not, and that has kept them from what I would imagine would be their dream job. So it's important to always put accurate facts on your resume that truly reflect your education and experience. So let's get started with what to include in the resume now that we understand the purpose. There's a preparing your resume handout, and I would encourage you to look on page 1 and 2 as we talk through the information here about what to include in a resume. The first thing that's obvious that needs to be on a resume is contact information, and oftentimes we gloss over the contact information, because we think it's a trivial part that we'll just put down. But I'll encourage you to think through some of the things here and to take a little bit more time to think about your contact information section than you normally would. Um, of course, your name needs to be the first thing on the resume. Your name needs to reflect your legal name because they may use your resume to be able to look up, as they do run a background check, if you're the person that's going to be hired for the job. If you go by something else, you can indicate that in quotes. But make sure that you have the professional appearance of the resume as it would appear for your legal name. Next, you obviously need to include address where if they need to mail something to you, it's going to be received. Also, you'll need a phone number and a phone number where you frequently answer the phone. And including your phone number, you need to make sure that any message recording is appropriate. And I'll give you an example. When I was a corporate recruiter, I made a call to schedule someone for an interview. And the phone rang a few times and then picked up, and someone said hello. And it gave the indication that someone had actually picked up the phone. So I began to talk as if someone had answered the phone. And a few seconds later, the voicemail went, "Psych, I'm not here. Leave me a message." Obviously, that was very unprofessional in the way that that person had recorded their outgoing message, and that person was not called back for an interview. So you need to make sure that any number that you are listing on your resume has an appropriate outgoing message. That could just be a standard hi and your name. "I'm not available right now to take your call, but please leave a message with your name and number, and I'll be happy to return your call as soon as possible." It would be a very professional recording. Or you could also just leave the standard one that repeats the number back and ask for the person to leave a message. Next, with your contact information, is an email address. Again, you need to make sure that that email address is professional in nature and conveys the image that you want to convey. For example, I've seen emails. One that stands out the most as a corporate recruiter was hotmama@hotmail.com. That is not an appropriate email address when submitting a professional resume. If you don't have an email address that you feel comfortable using, you can create one very easily through Gmail or through Yahoo that are free. And I would encourage you to try to set that up with your name and then at Gmail or at yahoo.com. If your name's not available, try to find something that's the closest to your name that conveys who you are. It's also important to realize that just like you want to include a phone number that you check often, you need to include an email address where you're checking that email account at least daily. If someone sends you correspondence, you need to be following up within at least 24 hours, if not 12 hours. Another thing to realize is that objectives now, which were very common on a resume a few years ago, are not the best method for conveying information to an employer. We encourage you to use a summary of qualifications, and we'll talk in a minute about what a summary of qualifications looks like. An objective, as we see here, basically tells an employer this is what I want. You see the objective here on the screen. Seeking a position in human resources where I can utilize my knowledge and expertise in the field does in no way answer for the employer, what can this person do for me? How is this person qualified to fill the position that I have posted? It doesn't provide any information that's valuable to the employer. And so why would you want to waste your 6 seconds that you have on something that doesn't give the employer any information about how you can succeed on the job and how you can fulfill their need? Here, you see a summary of qualifications example that goes to describe the level of experience that the person has and what type of things that they have been responsible for. It also speaks to some soft skills that the person has, like communication skills and organizational skills and analytical and problem-solving abilities. Even if you don't have 7 or more years of experience like this person does, a summary of qualifications emphasizes what you can do for the employer, not what the employer can do for you. And that's going to speak volumes during your 6 seconds as having the summary of qualifications at the top of your page, just below your contact information, because it gives you the opportunity to tell them what you can do for them. And it should be geared towards the job posting. And that's something that we'll look at when we're talking about best practices later on. So we strongly encourage you to consider a summary of qualifications, and your handout, as you saw on page 1, can give you some food for thought on how you define successes and qualities that you have that are going to lead to a proactive and results oriented summary of qualifications that's going to stand out to the employer. Next, I would encourage you to turn in your handout to page 2 through 4 as we talk through some other things to include on a resume. Next is the consideration of education and training and where that should fall. If the job posting that you're applying for requires a certain level of education or a certain kind of training, then that needs to come immediately after the summary of qualifications. So, for example, if you are applying for an accounting position and it requires a CPA and a bachelor's degree in accounting, that needs to be listed prominently so that when you get your 6 seconds, it's obvious that you have that qualification. You meet that qualification in and it's listed in your education and training section. If for some reason there's not a certain level of education or training required for the job, it's listed nowhere in the job posting, you may be better served in going straight to your work history, which we'll talk about in just a minute. It's always important, as you'll see throughout we talk through the seminar, that you need to cater your resume to the job opening. And so this is another example of looking at the job posting, seeing what is required, and listing that education and training next if it is required. If there's no indication of education or training needed in the job posting, then you may be better served in listing that at the end of your resume and including your work history immediately after the summary of qualifications. Education is also important to be on top of the resume if you are switching career fields and your education speaks to the industry or field that you're wanting to move in. So let's say that you have been in education, you've been a teacher, and your work experience speaks to that will be listed on your resume, but you're wanting to make a move into human resource management. Well, obviously, the employer is going to wonder, if they look directly at your work history next why, or your education, your work history before your education, why you would be seeking a job in human resources, or what would make you qualified for that opening in human resources if all your experience is in education. Hopefully you would have a summary of qualifications that would speak to your ability to train, that is a human resource function. But then your education would be there with your pursuit or your degree completion of a degree in business or human resource management that would provide the employer with the understanding of your transition in career. Your work history is going to be the most important thing on the resume. And depending on where you are in your career is going to dictate how and what work history you're going to include. Again, it all goes back to making sure that you're looking at what the employer wants and then catering your resume to what that employer needs based on your skills and qualifications. So let's talk through a couple of examples of how we would want to go about looking at work history. Say you have just finished college as a traditional college student, so you're 22, 23, 24 years old. You are just starting your career, and you have worked a few jobs in high school and in college to be able to prepare you to pay for some things, to pay for your schooling, to pay for expenses. But you don't have specific work history that relates to the field that you've pursued your education in. With that being said, it's important to still list those jobs. For example, let's say you've worked at Target in retail. It establishes work history for yourself, and then also you can look at the job posting for which you're applying and see how that retail experience could translate into what is wanted on the job. Most positions look for communication skills, for teamwork skills, for problem solving skills, and all of those things that you've probably learned on the job in a retail setting. So it's important to list those things and make sure you capture your experience, say as a cashier or as a retail clerk or as a retail salesperson, to cater to that opening. You need to list that work experience. It establishes work history, and it also establishes things that you can connect to almost any job opening. But let's say that you are an individual who is mid-career, that you have worked in a field and you're going back to pursue education to enhance those skills or to go a different direction. Your work history, if you worked as a 16 or 17-year-old at that retail establishment or at a fast food restaurant, is not as imperative to list because it is not what's going to connect most directly to what the employer is going to want. So if you have 10, 15, 20 years of experience, is first of all, including that work history as a teenager is going to make your resume too long. A recruiter is not going to look at all of that. But it's also not going to establish anything that's going to answer the question for the employer of what they can do for me. So it's important to look at how your skills that you have in your career translate to that next position that moves you up in your industry and in your field, or to how you have transferable skills if you're trying to make your career change. And we'll provide some examples of those in a minute. Formatting is a question that people often ask. How should I format my resume to speak most directly to the employer? I would encourage you to consider that the most important thing to look at in your resume is not necessarily should I do a chronological or functional resume, but what matches the job opening that I'm applying for, and how are the things that I'm listing in that work experience, whether it be chronologically based or functional based, is it answering the question what can for the employer what you can do for them? So, for example, here is a chronological resume formatted, and you see at the top the contact information and then the education. This would be an example of someone who has just recently completed their degree, has some work experience, as you see with this person in retail, but maybe wanting to transition out of a retail environment or a part-time retail environment to work in something more full-time that utilizes more fully their education. If you look at this though, what might be missing? There's no summary of qualification on this resume, and whether you're doing a functional or a chronological resume, we encourage you to take 2 to 3 sentences, as we mentioned before, to capsulate yourself in 2 or 3 sentence statement in your summary of qualification that speaks to the job opening. So this would be something that should be added to this chronological resume. You see here an example of a functional resume. As you go down this resume, there is the listing of work experience, but all it does is list employers and dates of employment instead of putting the experience or the task or results achieved on the job in bullet statements tied to each position. This is an example of someone who has a certain skill set that is wanting to be highlighted. And functional resumes are good if you have been in a series of positions with a different company that shows that are very similar. So the bullets that you would list under, let's say you have 3 different jobs that you've had or 3 different employers, and you're pretty much doing the same thing in each of those positions. Instead of repeating yourself under each of those work experience statements, it would be a better use of space and would convey information better to summarize those in a functional format and then list those employers and those position titles and dates of employment at the end of the resume. Basically, what you're conveying is that I have built these skill sets up over a diversity of jobs or employers, and you want to make sure you're presenting that information in the skill set that you have first. You see here that the paragraph statement for this person is a very good summary of qualifications. And I would imagine if you looked at the posting that he is applying for, that an associate's degree in automotive service technology may be something that is required, as well as the areas of strength that he lists there. Whether you're utilizing a functional format or a chronological format, it's not necessary to go beyond 2 pages for a resume for a couple of reasons. One is because in 6 seconds, someone is not going to look beyond a couple of pages. The other thing is that if you can't say it in 2 pages, people probably don't want to see it. So you need to be thinking about what you need to put first, and the time that's going to get the person to read on by what you put at the top of the resume. I say all that with the 2-pager unless something is specifically asked for. So there may be instances in certain industries or with certain job openings where they're going to request something that's going to require more than 2 pages. For example, if a CV is requested, those are traditionally very comprehensive and deep dive type resumes, and those are going to extend beyond those 2 pages. If a CV is requested, which is traditional in the education setting, we would encourage you to understand that that is different and that 2 pages, more than 2 pages, may be warranted in that case. As you see here, as I mentioned, the summary of qualifications, although it's not titled that, is in paragraph form here. So one of the best ways to look at combining a functional and chronological resume is to put that summary of qualifications at the beginning. Then you could go into a chronological resume, because that is, even though it's been used for a long time, what most people use and what most recruiters prefer to look at is a chronological resume. You would be strongly encouraged to use a chronological resume if your experience builds on itself to show how you've progressed within a job or within a company. That gives the employer who's reviewing your resume the opportunity to see the growth that you've exhibited through your skills. As I mentioned at the beginning, it's important to realize that there are things that you should not include in a resume. I'm going to talk about some specific things not to include, but I want to give you a rule of thumb for considering should I include this or not. And it's 2 questions that you see here. The first question is to ask yourself, is it job related? If what you're wanting to list on the resume is not job related, then don't include it. The second question is, does what you're wanting to put on the resume answer for the employer? Why would I want to hire him or her? And again, that goes back to question 1, is it job related? If it doesn't speak to how you can meet the employer's need, then it's not necessary. This is a good place, though, to bring up the fact that sometimes there are things that we need to include on our resume that are job related, that are related to the position or positions in which we're applying, that we may not have been paid to do. I'll give you an example. Recently, we have had a client that came to us for a resume revision, and that person had been out of the workforce for a while. She had been a stay-at-home mom. Prior to her leaving the workforce, she was educated and had worked as an architect. She was not necessarily wanting to enter the workforce again in that role. While she was at home, she had taken an interest in web design. And with that interest in web design, she had volunteered and had done her church's entire website, and had also done the website for the youth baseball league in her community. So she designed those websites, programmed those websites, and monitors those websites, updated them on a regular basis. And so the question is that job related? Yes, it most certainly is. Especially if she's wanting to do that or move into that for a career route. Even though she wasn't paid to do those things, it demonstrates her skills. And from a creative standpoint, it's something that an employer could actually go and look at to see her skill set through the visual representation of those websites. So I encourage you to realize that answering these two questions can help to show you what not to include, but it can also show you what to include when you're considering experience that you may not have been paid for. When we look at what not to include, most likely the things that are listed here are no's to the two questions above. Hobbies, if you like to fish or you like to knit, the question is that job related? Oftentimes it's not going to be, but in the case of the example that I gave you earlier, her hobby of web design was job related and therefore it needs to be included. Unless you're applying for some type of modeling role, a picture does not need to be on a resume. It's not something that is going to convey, is it job related, except for those rare instances, as I mentioned. And it's not going to answer for the employer, why would I want to hire him or her in a relevant scale. As we mentioned earlier, objectives don't answer those two questions for employers. So we'd encourage you to leave it off. And instead of using that space on your resume for objective, use a summary of qualifications. Resumes should be professional in nature. They should have a professional business appearance. With that being said, color and word art or unusual fonts should not be on your resume. If you are moving into a creative field like some type of graphic design or web design or some type of fine arts artistic endeavor, the resume is not the place to convey your creativity. A portfolio is. And so your resume should be standard and professional. And then if you are in a creative industry, you should utilize a portfolio to be able to exhibit that. I've heard people say, well, I want my resume to stand out, so I'm going to put my name in red, or I'm going to put it in an unusual font or design. Having been a corporate recruiter and looking through stacks of resumes, they are noticed, but they're noticed in the way that says this person isn't professional, and it does not help to answer the question, why would I want to hire him or her? So let's talk about some best practices now. How do you get your resume noticed by employers? As we've mentioned several times, it's important to realize that the best way to get noticed is to cater your resume to the job opening by answering the question for the employer, what can he or she do for me? How can they fulfill the needs needed in this position? But we want to make sure that there's some tactical things that you employ from a best practices perspective to make sure that your resume isn't overlooked. The first thing is to make sure that the formatting remains, and the best way to do that is to PDF your file. A lot of us work in Microsoft Word, but we never know who we're sending the file to, what version of Word he or she may have. And there's also other programs that may not be compatible with Word. So if you've got your resume laid out in a format that looks visually pleasing to you, and you send it or upload it through an online application system, and the formatting is not, the integrity of the formatting is not conveyed through PDFing your file, that person on the other end may get a resume that's formatted completely different than the way in which you intended it. So we encourage you to use PDF, which you can download for free through Acrobat if you don't already have it on your computer, to make sure that that's conveying the formatting that you intended it to. We have questions oftentimes about how should I save my resume, and oftentimes if you're saving it on your computer just for your benefit, you simply titled it resume. But when you're sending it or uploading it to an employer, um, especially if they're a recruiter or a hiring manager that is receiving lots of resumes and they get 10 files or 100 files or even 1,000 files saved as resume, yours may be overlooked. It may have been something they thought they'd looked at it, but they have not. So it's important to save. We encourage people to save their resume as their first name and last name as it appears on your contact information of your resume. That goes back to that full legal name. So if your full legal name is Elizabeth Sarah Jones, you go by Sarah, or let's say you go by Liz. Saving it Liz Jones is going to be confusing for the employer if they open it up and it says Elizabeth Sarah Jones. Even though it's obvious that the Liz comes from the Elizabeth, making sure that you have things consistent is going to leave is going to leave it where there's not questions on the end of the employer. And like we mentioned at first, the customizing your resume for the job opening is the most important best practice. And that goes beyond just the tactical formatting of your resume. I'd like to show you an example here of how you can do that. You need to customize your resume every time you look at a different job posting. So we encourage you to get a good, strong, standard resume, and then every time you apply for an opening, to pull the posting and to look to see what's required. One neat way to be able to visually see what keywords should I include, what should I make sure that I have there, in particular in the summary of qualifications, is to use a tool online called tagcrowd.com. TAGCROWD.com. So here's an example of a posting that we've pulled. And what we've done is we've copied this posting and then pasted it into TagCrowd. And here you see a visual representation of the words that are most prominent in that job posting. So what would you want to make sure that your resume targets? Obviously, your experience in marketing, social media marketing, that the word social is very prominent in that, content and developer, enterprise, experience and engage, all those are large. So content development marketing or social media content, you'd go back to the posting and make sure that you understood the context of where these words stand out. But you'd be missing the boat if you submitted a resume and did not emphasize the experience related to the words in bold. Another thing to see is that Microsoft is there, referring back to the job posting to say, okay, what type of Microsoft computer experience or skills do I need to have to emphasize on my resume? Next Labs is there. That would be something that you would need to go back and look and see what the reference is on the job posting to include experience that you have related to that. You also see Bachelor up there in the right-hand corner that's smaller. Looks like it's maybe only mentioned once or twice, but that more than likely is going to key you into the fact that a bachelor's degree is either required or preferred. So making sure that you go and look at that to see what the context of it is and include that as well. Cover letters. As I mentioned at the beginning of our seminar, cover letters are something that are oftentimes included or attached with a resume to submit for a job opening, but they have a different purpose than a resume. Cover letters should seek to convey more information beyond what the resume does. And so we offer up this paragraph format of what should be used and said in each paragraph for you to consider as you draft a cover letter. The first paragraph should include how you found out about the opening and why you're interested in that opening. So What skills, experience, or interests or passions do you have that lead you to be interested in that job or that employer? It's oftentimes important to realize that there are different employers of choice. And so in that paragraph, you may want to emphasize why you're interested in working for whatever company it may be, by bragging quite simply on that employer. The second paragraph should include why you're uniquely qualified for the role. And so this is where it can help you convey information that may not be easily conveyable through your resume. So, for example, um, one thing that we talked about earlier. Say all your work experience is in education. You've been a teacher for 15 years, let's say. But yet you've gone back to school to get a bachelor's degree in human resource management with a real interest in training and development, and you want to help connect the dots for the employer why you're making that transition. So you can emphasize how all your education and teaching experience lends itself well to the knowledge and skills that you developed in training, and how your bachelor's degree in human resources gives you the more holistic picture of human resources with that concentration in training and development. You can also, we would encourage to think in a way that makes it really clear for the employer how you have the qualifications for the job, and you map them to yours. So, for example, creating just a basic chart that says your qualifications and my qualifications. For example, a posting may say a bachelor's degree in business, marketing, or related field. Your box would then read bachelor's degree in marketing from the particular university, such as Athens State University, and the date in which that degree was obtained. Something else that may be listed as a required qualification is knowledge of Microsoft Office, including Word, PowerPoint, Excel, and Access. In your box, you would list something along the lines of how many years of experience you've had utilizing that software program. So 6 years of experience utilizing Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and Access. And you can continue on to hit all of those required and or preferred qualifications listed. So it's very clear that you have those things, and it's not something that the employer then flips your resume and is trying to hunt to see if you actually meet the required and or preferred qualifications. The last paragraph is designed to close in a way that states how you'll follow up with them about the job opening. So that will be, I will follow up with you next week to touch base about the position and where the hiring process is. And hopefully you'll be able to do that through email or through a phone call. If there's not contact information listed when you're applying for a job, you can simply close by saying, I'd appreciate the opportunity to discuss how my skills and experience match the needs that you have, and leave it at that. Sign it sincerely. Sometimes a visual representation of what we're talking about is easier than trying to describe what a cover letter or a resume would look like. So you see on your screen here an example of what we're talking about, of how your cover letter would look, and it gives you an example of how that second and third paragraph outlines how you're uniquely qualified for a role based on why you're passionate about the opening and how the qualifications match that. If you have questions about today's content or presentation, my information is on your screen. Please feel free to email me to reach out with questions that you have. Our company website is also listed there. That website, under Adults, has a section entitled Tools. And you'll see there a template for a resume that's a results resume that follows the practices that we've taught today and also extends to discuss how to cater your resume towards results and not just tasks that you complete on the job. In addition, we have a blog that has multiple resources for job seekers under the Beyond Work category of that blog. For example, with the cover letters that we mentioned and charting out your cover letter, there's a blog post there that gives you a visual of how to chart out your cover letter that may be valuable for you. There's also a posting about what we described in terms of utilizing TagCrowd as a way to know what keywords to include on your resume. Those are just a couple of examples of the resources that are there. Our blog is posted on Mondays and Thursdays, and so it's something that you can follow and subscribe to by visiting the blog page at the website you see there and just simply submitting your email address in the subscribe box that's at the top of the blog. We want to make sure that you're able to convey your skills and your talents and your passions through a resume and cover letter in a way that leads you to passion and productivity on the job, that's a benefit to you and that's a benefit to the employer. We look forward to answering any questions you have, and we hope that you found this information valuable.